Good morning. Thanks again for joining me with Story Time with Joyce. We're reading from my book, Betty, and we left off last week where John proposed to Betty, and they're going to be married, and she's planning on having Carol join them and live with her. So let's see what's going on. This is chapter 22, and the title is Take Off My Nightgown. Sounds interesting. Betty and John picked up Carol and met Ruth and her boyfriend at City Hall. Serena was Betty's witness and John's brother Harry was his witness. They all gathered in the courtroom where John and Betty got married by the judge, and when the gavel came down pronouncing that John and Betty were now husband and wife, tears could be seen in Carol and Serena's eyes. Betty was glowing, and John seemed so proud. They all left City Hall and everyone headed for a small gathering at John's house, Betty's new home. Betty had never seen his house before. John always picked her up, and their whole courtship was spent eating some of Betty's fine home cooking and at a neighborhood diner. Or they spent many an evening at the movies, the Biograph Theater, or just taking rides on the weekends. Betty was shocked to see the enormity of her new home. She knew John's house was a 3-story brick single-family residence. However, she never would have guessed the house was 5,500 square feet. It had 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a country-sized kitchen, and a formal dining room, and an oak plate rack that runs around the room 3/4 up the wall, and a parlor with an oak window seat, as well as a beautiful oak floors all throughout the house. She was in awe. The mood of the house was wonderfully festive. As the evening wound down to the end, John and Betty said their farewells to their families and friends and were ready to settle in for the night. They were both anxious to be alone. Betty was about to ask which room was Carol's when she heard John say, "Carol, you can sleep in the parlor. It has a sunroom which will be perfect for you. I'll have your mom make up the divan for you. All your things are upstairs and your mom's in my room. We can bring those downstairs tomorrow." "John, we never talked about Carol sleeping in the parlor. I just thought she would take one of the rooms upstairs," Betty said, surprised. "Betty, all the upstairs rooms are rented out with the exception of ours." "Rented out? I didn't know. I'm sorry, Betty. I just never thought about it, although that really isn't true. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you wouldn't want to share my home with me. Since I lived alone in such a big house, I rented out 4 of the bedrooms. You know that my dad left my brother and I this house. Harry had already had a home of his own and his own family. I was stuck with this huge place, so I rented out some of the rooms, 4 of them. It's sort of a boarding house," John explained. "John, it's okay. It's a big place, and I wouldn't want to have lived here alone either. Let me get Carol bedded down, and let's get to bed ourselves. It's been a very long day." "Good night, Carol," Betty said, and then added, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Good night, Mama. I don't mind sleeping in the parlor. The sunroom was like my own little sanctuary, and sure is better than the dorm at school." Betty and John retired to the room after getting Carol settled. Betty just gasped when she saw their bed. It was so big. There was 4 beautiful, tall, maple hand-carved posters at each corner of the bed, and 2 maple dressers sitting side by side, and a maple dressing table with a 3-sided mirror. "Oh, John, this room is beautiful," Betty exclaimed. "I'm glad you like it. All this was my mother's. When you said you'd marry me, I had it all set up in this room for you. Tomorrow you can get all settled in, but for now let's get some sleep. It has been a long day." Betty's new life was so far removed from her small farm in Kentucky or the settlement house where she and Arvin had first started their new life together in Chicago. And their first apartment would have fit completely into her new dining and parlor room. John was one of those high city officials that she and Arvin used to bootleg for. Betty never had a city dream of her own. If she had, she knew it would look like this. Carol started to attend a local high school and settled into the parlor's sunroom as her space in the house. At times she was uncomfortable sleeping in an open room where the men boarders would come downstairs and pass through to the kitchen or to leave the house. She kept that to herself not to stress out her mom. After a short while, John expected Betty to clean the house and provide meals for his boarders. Betty was used to hard work, so she didn't mind. She felt it was a trade-off for the life she had been given for her and Carol. Ruth didn't approve of this marriage at all. She felt all John wanted was a housekeeper and reminded Betty of that every time they got together. Serena saw it the same way. After a while, Betty began to see it that way as well. She started keeping to herself, more reflecting on her life. Late one afternoon, Carol came into the kitchen where Betty was preparing food for the house. Betty was surprised by what she saw and said, "Carol, where did you learn to put all that stuff on your face?" "The ladies that live in Pa's building," Carol responded. "What do you mean, the ladies that live in Pa's building?" Betty questioned. "Papa lives upstairs of some ladies who would watch me when he had to leave. They would do my hair and show me how to put makeup on. They were very beautiful and had really pretty clothes." "Well, take that stuff off your face. You're not going out like that." "But Mama, it's the dance at school. It's my first dance. Can I wear lipstick?" "Wash your face and we'll talk about the lipstick." Carol went into the bathroom and washed off all the makeup, then put on a little lipstick and went back to the kitchen for her mom's approval. "How's this? I just put on a little bit of light pink lipstick." "That's fine. Remember, don't be messing around with them boys," Betty said. "Mama," Carol responded, slightly embarrassed. Then she kissed her mom on the cheek and said, "Bye, I love you." "Goodbye. Remember, be good now and stay away from them boys," Betty said as Carol was leaving the house. As the years rolled by, John and Betty's marriage stayed pretty much the same. Betty would spend her days preparing and cooking meals for their boarders and cleaning up after everyone. John went to work and still attended political meetings. Serena and Betty would still have their weekly tea. Betty was content. Not really happy, but content. She had a home, a husband, and a good friend. World War II, as known as the Second World War, was a global war that lasted from 1939 to 1945. The Empire of Japan aimed to dominate Asia and the Pacific in 1937, was already at war with the Republic of China. But the World War is generally said to have begun on September 1st, 1939, with the invasion of Poland by Nazi Germany. France and the United Kingdom entered the war shortly afterwards. Time marched on. Ruth got married, got pregnant, and had a little boy. Her husband got drafted into the war. Ruth's husband was sent to Germany and ultimately was killed at the battle over the bridge at Remagen. Carol met a young man, fell in love, quit school, and got married. She told her friends that one of the reasons she got married was to get out of the house, that sleeping in the parlor's sunroom with men boarders walking around was becoming very, very uncomfortable for her. Her new husband's family found them a house to rent on the south side near them. Shortly thereafter, they had a baby girl. One night she came home after being out with her mom and Betty and walked in on a very surprised husband. He was not only entertaining another woman, but this woman was wearing her nightgown. She flew into a rage, called a friend, packed a suitcase, grabbed her daughter, and left. That was the end of Carol's marriage. The Great Depression was over. While the city was recuperating from the many losses caused by the Depression, the country entered the war with Japan. Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, causing the deaths of 2,400 Americans and wounded another 1,100. The 32nd President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, died the very same year the war ended. Arvin's prostitute business started to fail due to the girls going out on their own. As time went on, prostitution was moving to the suburbs. Lori ran off with one of her old clients. Jobs once again became available in the garment factories, and Arvin went back to work. After several years on the job, he caught his hand in one of the milling machines and lost several of his fingers. He ended up in the hospital, fell in love with his attending nurse, and got married. Lori ran off with one of her old clients. Boy, a lot has happened in the last several years. So next week we are reading chapter 23. It is called Farewell. And again, all these books, Betty, Ruth, and Carol, can be purchased on Amazon.com. All the books were written by me, Joyce Bennett-Hall. Or you can go to my website, JoyceBennett-Hall.com. Thanks and have a great week. Bye-bye.